author of Managing the Gift of Your ADD-HD Child and other related titles. This is not his only offering in that area. Study reveals nearly 1 million children in the United States potentially misdiagnosed with ADD-HD. That is a staggering statistic.
Absolutely, and in fact, that statistic was based on percentage of how many children we had. And since I was last here, a new statistic has come out that there has been a 66% increase in the diagnosis of ADD-HD over the last decade. 66%. So now the number is there is over 10 million children being diagnosed with it, 86% being medicated. So we're probably talking closer to 2 million children.
When we're talking misdiagnosed, identify and explain how we're using that term with ADD-HD.
Well, what happens is when a child is assessed or an adult is assessed for ADD-HD, it is all observational. So what happens is they look and say, is the child having a hard time paying attention? Is the child acting up? Are they fidgeting? Are they moving all the time? Are they demonstrating everything that we would have 20 or 30 years ago called type A personality? You know, highly successful type A personality traits. And if these children are demonstrating it, and there's a checklist, and you know, they may have the teacher fill it out, they may have the parent, they may not. I mean, it has been known, and is not uncommon. Parent goes in, says to the doctor, this is what our experience at home is, this is what the teacher said. Doctor gives the label and writes the prescription.
He takes their information as gospel on that then?
Yes.
Now, this is a mistake?
Well, I think that first of all we have to look at the fact that there are so many things that will exacerbate a highly brilliant and highly creative child, because that's what we're talking about, highly brilliant and highly creative.
Sugar being one of them.
Sugar being one of them. The other thing is, you know, sugar in the form of high fructose corn syrup. Dyes. The other thing is sometimes it can be a wheat issue. Sometimes it can be a dairy issue.
And we're talking things that are not really good for anyone, but moving on.
In excess, yep.
Right.
And so we're talking about a lot of things in diets that can exacerbate this child into go from what I call the gift to the curse of ADD-HD. And so it makes this shift. Now, one of the other things that I always like to look at here is, because I identified this back in the late 90s as part of an evolutionary process. These people were really the architects of the 20th century. If, based on today's standards, Einstein, Edison, Graham Bell, Ford, they would have been diagnosed. You know, we look at someone like Thomas Edison. At 12 years old, he was considered inappropriate for education. He left education and he got a job selling concessions on a train going into Chicago. He'd stay all day in Chicago and, according to his own words, read every book in the Chicago library, and then ended up creating 1,093 patents that changed the world. Yet we have to realize that this is a fact, but we have to realize with children in school or even adults, there is some area of parameters which especially a child must adhere to learn in the classroom, whether it's a special education situation or the normal education classroom. Well, what we have to look at is that what gets these children in trouble more often than not is the fact they're not being challenged. The education is not keeping pace with how fast their brains are working. And then we have eliminated recesses, we've cut them back, after school programs. If these kids, it's been shown again and again, get more green time, if they're out and they're allowed to play more, if they're actually, their learning was done in a more interactive, kinesthetic way. These medications that we put them on, you know, they do show that they will help memorization, not comprehension, not actual learning. And in a 6 to 8 year time period, the non-medicated child will perform as well as the medicated child in all areas of comprehension. Dr. Kevin, hold your thoughts. We have a short commercial break, and when we come back, more with Dr. Kevin.
Welcome back to the Morning Scramble. Our guest, Dr. Kevin Ross Emery, author of Managing the Gift of Your ADHD Child. Dr. Kevin, I'm sure you've probably heard comedians touch this subject, and not to be too insensitive, but some of them say, you know, ADHD, we're just hyper when we were growing up. How would you respond to that?
Well, I would say that the ADD-HD child got extra energy and is much more wired into the environment that around them. And some of these very brilliant comedians, like Robin Williams is ADD-HD, Will Smith is ADD-HD, they don't medicate. They're not out. Their brilliance comes because we didn't drug them up and dumb them down. You know, we look at it, and you know, just before break I talked about that, how they have that, they do just as well as their peers over that time period. But in that same, in a 2 to 3 year time period, they will grow an inch less because one of the side effects is stunting their growth. They actually, you know, physically grow less and have a whole list of these side effects. And we look at these type of things and we don't calculate that in and say, you know, do we know how to educate a brilliant child? Do we know how to educate a creative child? Upwards to $266 billion was spent in 2010 that were associated costs with ADD-HD.
You know, let me, my audience knows that I tend to simplify things. It's the way my brain works. Simplifying this just a bit. ADD-HD, we immediately think of that as hyper. This is the visual we get when we hear this. We think this is isolated to the physical being of the person and they are hyper. ADD-HD, as I'm hearing you talk, is more related to the mental activity than the physical activity. The physical activity is a manifestation.
Yes, there is a, in my first book, Managing the Gift, Alternative Approaches for Attention Deficit Disorder, I looked at the physical impacts, the emotional impacts, the intellectual impacts, and the energetic impacts, how they actually connect with the world around them. And these children and adults, again, evolutionary process. They are affected on all levels. So they move through the world differently, which is why I say they do not have a disability, they have a diffability. And part of what they're coming up against is very rigid black and white institutions that have been very stuck for a long time in their methodology and are hamstrung by finances, by getting quality, the high quality of people. We have the overcrowded classrooms. There's a whole list of things. But when I look at what we spend on education every year, and I threw an extra $266 billion in it, I think that we could be feeding these kids better diets, giving their parents better parenting skills, and understanding how to parent them, and we could be rehauling, completely rehauling, instead of passing laws like, you know, every child left behind. Because that's what it did. Every child got left behind in that law because standardized testing
did more harm than.
Yeah.
Dr.
Good
Kevin,
advice.
thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.